Hello everyone and welcome to C++ VTM number 4, brought to you by 3dbuzz.com. My name is Jason Busby, and hosting this VTM we've got Mr. Joel Van Inwick. How's it going, Joel?
It's going all right. How you doing?
Oh, not bad at all. In this VTM, what we're going to be doing is taking a look at how we can go about creating some graphical user interfaces inside of Windows.
Right.
Now we've got to be careful here. We don't want to restrict ourselves just to the Windows platform. We would like everything that we develop here to be cross-platform, so that you guys out there that are using Linux or some other operating system can, for the most part, follow along without any problem. Well, to do this, we can't just jump in and use the standard Windows API to develop our interfaces, the window, the controls, etc.
Right, that would limit everyone to Windows.
Yeah, because the engine for handling all of the graphics, basically, for all the UI elements, would have to be rewritten for everything, and that, what a pain.
That's a huge pain.
And since, you know, the focus of this VTM series is game design, we'd like to be able to create our games in a cross-platform manner.
Yep.
So, this is where wxWidgets comes into play. The wxWidgets it's a library.
Right.
Okay? A library full of function calls, and it's a wrapper, if you will. It enables us to develop UIs that look and feel the way the UIs normally do in the OS that we use.
Right.
So the UIs that we're going to be creating in this VTM are just going to look like regular Windows user interfaces, a regular window with buttons, etc., that looks just like any other Windows application inside of Microsoft Windows. But if you were to use pretty much the exact same code, but just compile for, let's say, Linux, it's going to look just like it would over in a Linux graphical environment. Yeah.
Right.
Ooh, excuse me. So anyways, got a little too excited there. So wxWidgets provides an extreme amount of power to us. Now that's what it is basically.
Right.
And we're going to be talking about it and creating user interfaces throughout this VTM. But now wxWidgets is not the only wrapper out there.
Right. There's a lot of different wrappers you can use for cross-platform development. I mean, wxWidgets is great for us because for beginners it has a lot of documentation. So
it has fantastic
documentation.
It has a wiki.
It has a wiki. Beginners can just come in, look at the wiki, look at the documentation, and really get started in it really quickly.
It has a tremendous community.
It does have a tremendous community. There's a lot of people working on it, which means they put out a lot of different updates for this stuff, and
that means bugs get squashed pretty quickly.
Fixed. Yep, very nice about that. And yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we just wanted to point that out because, you know, I'm sure we're going to have somebody out there that's going to watch this video and say, well, why didn't you use brand X or brand Y? Well, this is our personal preference, what we would like to use, and we find it very easy to learn this particular wrapper. And the cool thing about it is, once you get comfortable with a wrapper,
it's very easy to go to another
wrapper. If you have to
wrapper.
migrate to another one, you're going to find it very simple.
Yeah, the same concepts in wxWidgets can apply to pretty much any other wrapper you have. You have controls, you have widgets or whatever, and you have event handling, and that's in pretty much every wrapper.
For sure. Now, what's really important in the introduction video right now, the one you're watching, is we want to show you where you get it from and how to get it installed and set up with .NET.
Yep.
Okay, so Joel, where do we get it?
Well, first we're at wxWidgets.org, and if we come to the download right here, and you have the stable release and the development snapshot. Stable release is just something that's been tested and tested and tested. Most bugs have been pretty much removed. The development snapshot is updated very often and has new features, new fixes, etc. In our case, we have some things that we use.
Some functionality that's available in 5.3, but that's not over in 4.2. So if you guys out there, you know, I'm sure there's people out there that would only prefer a stable release on their system.
And that's fine.
And I understand that. But just be aware that we may not support, or you may not have the same capabilities that we're going to have in some of the areas that we're going to touch on a little bit later on.
That's right. So let's go ahead and just download the snapshot. So just give this a second. Let's go to this page. Alright, so we have, if we just scroll down here, 2.5.3 setup. We go ahead and download that from SourceForge. And it's 15 megs. We've already downloaded. We don't want
everybody to wait, of course.
So if we go back on this, another thing that's really important, not to the wiki. Well, it just went back. No worries. Let's just go back to the downloads for a second. The other thing we really want to have is the documentation, because documentation is very important. As we were saying, it's excellent documentation.
And what's really cool is they release it in several different flavors.
That's right. We have
WinHelp, HTML, PDF file, etc.
Right. It makes everything very easy, depending on which way you prefer. So we've already downloaded that as well. So if we come over to here, you'll see that we have both of them downloaded. So let's go ahead and extract the setup program. So let's extract this to this folder here. And just like with any setup program, we run setup. And yes, I want to install, I'm sure. And just press next, and just install in the basic way. Only thing we're going to change is we want to put it in program files. Either is fine, but in our case, this is nice. So let's come down to here, select program files. And so it's going to be in program files, wxWidgets 2.5.3. So that's good. Press next on this. It's going to create a program group as well. So let's go ahead and install that. While it's doing this, let's go back to this folder here and extract the help, because I think it's important to just show you guys how the help works.
Well, it's extremely important because we're not going to teach every single function that's available inside this library.
No, the amount of classes and functions that you have are just
crazy.
Amazing. So you're going to be using the help a whole lot when you're learning this platform. So
what we're going to try to do is make sure as we go through this VTM, we ourselves use the help often so that everybody kind of gets an idea of how to go about using the help to find specific things.
Right. I've had a lot of beginners just go, how do you know which one to use? I mean, there's so many. What do you do? Well, I just look in the help file. You know, you have the index, you have the find, and if you use these tools, I should cancel on that. If you use these tools well, if you know how to use them, learning wxWidgets is very, very simple.
It's a breeze, right?
Yep. So let's just keep that there and go back to setup, and it's done. So let's press finish on this. Let's cancel this out.
Now, all because you've set it up does not mean that .NET's ready to use it.
Right. It doesn't know which header files to use, which library files to use, and in fact, wxWidgets by default,
it's just source code.
It's just source code.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of header files and CPP files, but we have to compile that stuff.
That's right.
So we come over to program files where we install it. You'll see we have wxWidgets 2.5.3. And if we come under source here, we have wxWindows.dsw, which is a workspace, a Visual C++ 6 workspace. So if we open this guy up, it's going to ask us, do we want to convert it to the newest version, because we have 2003. So let's say yes to all. Just give it a second. Converting is difficult. So come over to here, and we have the WX Windows project. And as we were saying before, we have different ones in here. Actually, I don't think we mentioned it before, but we have JPEG, PNG, TIFF. These are a set of functions that allow us to handle TIFF files, JPEG files. Very, very convenient. And that's another thing about wxWidgets that's very nice, is that it provides not only multi-platform GUI development, but also a bunch of classes that help us with file manipulation, string handling, all sorts of extra stuff that's just not necessarily OS dependent, which is very, very cool. So if we come over to WX Windows, before we compile this, we need to go to headers, and under the setup folder, the setup.h has a bunch of constants that are defined that basically say what features are supported by this library. And one thing we want to make sure that's supported is OpenGL, and by default, that's not supported. So if we search for wxUseGL Canvas, and as you can see, we come down here, it says setting wxGL Canvas to 1 enables OpenGL support. In future lessons, we will be using OpenGL, so let's go ahead and set this to 1 here, and save that out. And with the debug configuration enabled, let's just go to build and build this solution. And that's going to basically take this setup file and copy it. Well, I don't want to go into this 2D, but basically it copies it into a specific directory so that for each, whether it's a debug release, a release, depending on which configuration you're using, has a separate header file. So your debug release could only have, say, OpenGL support, and your release one doesn't have OpenGL support, that kind of thing. So you can change it around. And so let's just let this continue. Another thing I would like to mention is that by default, pretty much everything is supported besides OpenGL, which means that the library is going to turn out to be rather large. And for the release build, you may want to go through this and remove anything that you're not using in that project, and that'll just make it so that the file size is, in the end, a lot smaller. And that's very nice. So let's just give this a second.
Yeah, it's just about done.
Yeah. Another thing is, when you see all sorts of warnings up here, don't let that bother you. They're just warnings, they're not errors, so don't let that freak you out. So let it continue a second. After this is done, we'll set up our environment, but I do recommend doing a release build as well, because you want one that's just for debugging so that it's easier to debug, it gives messages, etc. when something goes wrong inside of wxWidgets. The release build doesn't give those warnings, which is great.
And of course, we'll just do the release build off screen.
Right. No point making you guys suffer through another compilation.
There you go.
So 7 succeeded, 0 failed. Excellent. Now, to set up .NET here, we go to Tools, go to Options, and if we scroll down to the Projects folder here, go to Visual C++ Directories, and switch this over to Include Files. Now, if we go back to C Program Files for a second here, you'll notice we have an Include directory, and under the WX folder, look at all these header files. .NET does not know where these headers are by default. It's not some sort of magic thing. We need to tell it where to look. So if we come back over to here, we need to add a directory that points to that directory. So let's just copy this folder right here. Actually, we want it to point right here, so let's just sorry. Too much coffee. Let's come over to here and just paste this directory in here. So now we have it pointing to the include directory. So if we come over to library files as well, for each debug, release, or whatever configuration we have, it creates a library file that our program actually links with. So if you look up here under the lib folder, you have wxmswd.lib. Now that means this is the debug release of wxWidgets, and for the other releases it's going to be a different file name. So in this case we want it to point to this directory. So come over to here, and under the libraries, let's just add that directory. So paste this in, just change the end to lib, and that's it. So that's really all there is to set up the environment. When you actually go to create a project, you'll need to set some project settings as well, but we'll look at that in the next lesson.
Right. As a matter of fact, in the next lesson, we'll see if we can make things a little more interesting by creating our typical Hello World application, but this time around, as opposed to like a command screen to send the information out to, we're going to do it inside of a window.
Yes, it will be cool.
Yes, it will. So with that, that's going to wrap up the introduction to C++ VTM number 4, wxWidgets. Thanks a lot, everyone.